In the winter of 1900, 3 lighthouse keepers vanished from a remote island in the North Atlantic. No bodies, no signs of a struggle, no explanation, just silence and a table still set for a meal that was never eaten. But here's the question that still chills investigators today. How do 3 grown men disappear from a tiny island surrounded by cliffs, locked doors, and violent seas, with no witnesses, no sounds, and no trace of escape? And a darker question follows. If they didn't leave willingly, then what came for them? Tonight, we return to the Flannan Isles, a place the locals call the island that eats men. And we ask one final haunting question. Was this tragedy an accident, a cover-up, or something far more terrifying? To understand the terror behind the disappearance, you have to understand the place where it happened. 20 miles off the coast of Scotland, far beyond where most fishing boats dare to travel, lie the Flannan Isles, a cluster of jagged rocks rising straight out of the Atlantic like broken teeth. No trees, no shelter, no safe harbor, just black cliffs and waves that strike with the force of sledgehammers. For centuries, sailors avoided these islands, not because of their shape, but because of what they heard. Locals say the wind here doesn't just howl, it whispers, like voices calling your name from behind you, even when you're completely alone. To many, the Flannan Isles were cursed. To the men who worked there, the island was something far worse, a place you went to survive, not to live. In December 1900, 3 men were stationed at the Flannan Isles lighthouse. Thomas Marshall, the assistant keeper, only 28 but already hardened by life at sea, known for his discipline, his careful record-keeping, and a sense of unease he never fully shook off. Weeks before the disappearance, Marshall reportedly said the island felt wrong during storms, as if the wind carried something with it. James Ducat, the principal keeper, a seasoned veteran, calm, trustworthy, steady. If a storm broke something, Ducat fixed it. If spirits were low, Ducat raised them. He was the backbone of the operation, the type of man who doesn't panic easily. Donald MacArthur, the occasional keeper, rugged, tough, and known to settle disputes with his fists when needed. He joined the team temporarily due to staff shortages. MacArthur was respected and feared. The man did not scare easily. And yet, in the final logbook entries found in the lighthouse, Marshall wrote something that made investigators' blood run cold. MacArthur is crying. No one could imagine what could scare a man like MacArthur. But the logs didn't stop there. Life on the Flannan Isles was brutally simple. Wake up, tend the light, check the weather, eat, sleep, repeat. The men relied on supply boats for food and fuel. Storms often trapped them for weeks at a time. Isolation wasn't a side effect, it was the job. The lighthouse itself stood like a lone sentinel, its white tower cutting through the fog. Thick stone walls protected the keepers from the Atlantic's rage. At least, they were supposed to. Inside were small bedrooms, storage rooms, a kitchen, and the narrow spiral staircase leading to the lantern room. Every sound echoed, every gust of wind pressed against the windows. Every night, the sea roared like an angry god. And yet, for all its isolation, nothing about the island suggested that 3 men could vanish without leaving so much as a boot print. Something had to have happened. Something violent, something unexpected, something fast. But when a passing ship reported that the lighthouse beacon had gone dark, and when a relief crew was finally sent, what they discovered inside the empty building would ignite one of the most chilling mysteries in maritime history. 3 men entered this lighthouse. Not one of them walked out. On December 25th, 1900, one day after Christmas, the relief vessel Hesperus forced its way through the freezing Atlantic, fighting currents that felt almost alive. The crew expected to find 3 lighthouse keepers waiting for them on the landing platform, waving their arms, desperate for fresh supplies and human contact. But as the Hesperus approached the island, nothing moved. No figures on the cliffs, no smoke from the kitchen chimney, no signal flag. Just the lighthouse, standing tall, silent, and dead. Captain James Harvey felt dread coil in his stomach. The keepers were required to hoist a flag when a supply ship came into view. But the flagpole was bare, completely bare. He ordered the horn to be blasted. The sound echoed off the cliffs and dissolved into the wind. No reply. Something was terribly wrong. It took several attempts to land a small boat on the slippery west side of the island. The men climbed the steep stone steps carved into the cliff, steps that had claimed more than one life over the years. Leading them was Joseph Moore, a relief keeper. Moore had been to the island many times before, but later he would say this was the first time he felt true fear walking toward the lighthouse. As he climbed, he noticed details that gnawed at him. The iron railings were twisted. The turf around the storage boxes was ripped apart by the wind. The gate to the compound hung, open, banging softly in the breeze. Still, nothing moved. Moore reached the front door and froze. It was shut, but unlocked. Inside, the air was cold, too cold. He called out the men's names. No response. Only the echo of his own voice bouncing up the spiral staircase. The kitchen was the first room he checked, and this is where the mystery begins to twist into something dark, unnatural, and deeply disturbing. On the table sat a half-eaten meal, bread, salted mutton, potatoes, plates laid out, cups filled. It was as if the keepers had stood up in the middle of their dinner and never returned. A chair was overturned, not broken, just knocked over violently, as if someone leapt up in panic. More moved deeper inside. The beds were neatly made. Clocks stopped, each one frozen at the same time, suggesting whatever happened fast. And then Moore noticed something odd. There were 3 sets of oilskins, thick coats meant to protect against brutal weather. But only 2 were missing. One keeper, almost certainly MacArthur, had gone outside without his coat. This made no sense. Not in December. Not on this island. No sane man stepped into those storms without protection. Yet someone had. Moore climbed the winding stair to the top, and here the mystery grew even deeper. The lantern, the light that warned ships away from the deadly rocks, had not been lit for days. Oil was still stocked. Wicks were unused. Nothing was broken. 3 trained men had simply failed to do their most important job. Or something had kept them from doing it. Moore ran back to the cliffs, signaling desperately to the Hesperus. Captain Harvey sent more men to search every inch of the island. But the result was the same. No bodies. No signs of a fall. No footprints leading toward the sea. No notes. No broken equipment. No struggle. Nothing. It was as if the island had swallowed them whole. That night, Captain Harvey wrote a message back to the lighthouse headquarters. A dreadful accident has happened at Flannan. The 3 keepers have disappeared. No sign of them can be found. But the truth was already clear. This was no accident. Something far stranger had happened on that island. Something no official report could explain. 3 men gone, without a cry, without a trace, without a single moment of struggle. And when investigators dug deeper, what they found in the official logbook would chill Scotland to the bone.
The disappearance of the keepers shocked the Northern Lighthouse Board.
3 experienced men, a sturdy lighthouse, good weather reported across the region. Nothing about the Flannan Isles made sense. And so the investigation began, with the one piece of evidence the men left behind, the logbook. A simple, brown leather journal, filled with entries that should have been routine. What investigators found instead was something that felt like a cry for help. The last official entry was dated December 15th, just 1 week before the men vanished. But earlier entries, days before, hinted at growing fear. December 12. Severe winds, the likes of which I have never seen. Thomas Marshall. This entry stunned investigators, because on that day, every ship within 100 miles of the Flannan Isles reported calm weather. No storms, no rogue waves, nothing unusual. The island seemed to have been experiencing something no one else saw. December 13. James Ducat is very quiet. MacArthur is crying. This made no sense. MacArthur was known as a tough, fearless man, a brawler, someone hardened by years at sea. What could make a man like that cry? Fear? Exhaustion? Something he witnessed? Or something he heard? December 15. Storm ended, sea calm. God is over all. The final line, God is over all, felt like the ending of a prayer, or a resignation, or a warning. And yet, in the official weather reports for the region, the storms Marshall wrote about never existed. Investigators were baffled. Either the men experienced something psychological, hallucinations, cabin fever, or the island itself had been hit with a hyper-local storm so unusual, so violent, that it left no trace except in the minds of the keepers. But that was only the beginning. When officials examined the western cliffs, they discovered something troubling. A box of ropes was smashed open. A metal railing was bent outward. A patch of grass was ripped away. A large rock, over a ton in weight, had been moved. It looked like the area had been struck by something massive, but the official wave measurements for that week showed nothing powerful enough to cause such destruction. So the question formed, if not a natural force, what did this? The Northern Lighthouse Board's investigator, Robert Muirhead, compiled all evidence and testimonies. Privately, he admitted the case made no sense, but publicly, the report needed to reassure the public. Britain needed to believe the lighthouses were safe, so the official version was simple. The men were swept away by a large wave. But behind closed doors, Muirhead refused to rule out darker possibilities. He wrote in his notes that the missing oilskin meant at least one keeper left the lighthouse in extreme haste. The log entries indicated unusual emotional stress. No bodies were ever recovered, unusual for local tides. No equipment was washed away, only the men. And he also questioned something else, something almost nobody noticed. The last log entry was on December 15th, but the men weren't discovered missing until the 26th. Why would 3 men simply stop writing their required log entries for 11 days if they were still alive? Something was wrong with the timeline. Very wrong. After weeks of investigation, interviews, and analysis, one question lingered behind every theory. Why did all 3 men leave the lighthouse at the same time? Lighthouse protocol forbade it. Always. No exceptions. One man must remain inside at all times, especially in storms. Yet, they all left. Even the one man without a coat. So investigators were forced to consider the possibility that the men didn't leave voluntarily. Something forced them outside. Something sudden. Something terrifying. But what? A storm that never happened? A wave big enough to kill 3 men, but small enough to leave everything else untouched? A fight? A crime? A lie? Or something the official report could never put on paper? The official investigation was finished, but the real questions were just beginning. Because no matter what the report claimed, the island had a reputation long before 1900. A reputation for taking people and never giving them back. Before we dive into the darker possibilities, the ones investigators whispered about behind closed doors, we have to examine the explanations that seem the most believable. Or at least, the ones that sound believable. Because on a place like the Flannan Isles, even the simplest theory twists into something stranger the longer you stare at it. Theory 1. A massive storm. The first natural explanation was the most obvious. A violent storm hit the island, the men went outside to secure equipment, a giant wave swept them away. Simple, clean, comforting. But there's a problem. A big one. There was no storm. Ships across the region reported calm weather. None of the barometers recorded severe pressure drops. Nothing in the lighthouse itself showed signs of internal storm damage. Windows intact, roof secure, lantern room untouched. Even the log entries describing the severe winds were inconsistent with the weather everywhere else. It's almost as if the men experienced a storm alone that no one else saw. A local phenomenon? A sudden microburst? Maybe. But that still doesn't explain why the men abandoned their most sacred rule. Never leave the lighthouse unmanned. Theory 2. A rogue wave. Scientists suggested another possibility. A freak rogue wave. Rogue waves can rise 60 to 90 feet from calm seas and strike without warning. They are rare, but real. Could one have slammed into the west landing and dragged the keepers to their deaths? There is evidence the landing suffered damage. Bent rails, a rope box destroyed, a metal railing bent outward, a patch of grass ripped away, a large rock, over a ton in weight, had been moved. It looked like the area had been struck by something massive, but the official wave measurements for that week showed nothing powerful enough to cause such destruction. So the question formed, if not a natural force, what did this? Theory 3. A cliffside accident. Another idea? One man went outside. He slipped. His screams brought the other 2 running. All 3 fell into the sea. A tragic chain reaction. It sounds possible, until you look closer. The cliffs are steep, yes, but the men were trained, experienced, and familiar with every inch of the island. If one of them fell, his body would almost certainly wash ashore within days. The currents in the area are predictable. Bodies from that region don't simply disappear into forever. But in this case, nothing. Not even a fragment of clothing. And if MacArthur went out first, as the missing oilskin suggests, why would he run into dangerous wind and rain without the one piece of gear that keeps you alive? Even in an emergency, men who work the sea do not go out unprotected. Something made him forget that rule. Something powerful. But what? Theory 4. Equipment failure. Could a machine malfunction have drawn them out? A failing crane? A broken mooring rope? A loose supply box? The area around the west landing did show signs of distress, but nothing indicated an active emergency urgent enough to drag 3 men outside at once. The machinery was intact. The ropes didn't snap. No equipment was in immediate danger. Investigators were forced to accept a disturbing truth. There was no natural explanation that fit all the evidence. Something was missing. Something crucial. Because if this was simply a tragic accident, why did the island feel as though the men vanished mid-step, mid-action, mid-life? Why did the lighthouse look like it had been frozen in time? Why did everything point to a sudden, violent moment of chaos without leaving behind a single sign of what caused it? And that brings us to the theories investigators didn't want to talk about. The theories that involve fear, violence, madness, and secrets. The theories that suggest the danger wasn't outside the lighthouse, but inside. When natural explanations fail, humans become the next obvious culprit. What if the men didn't vanish because of the sea, or because of a rogue wave, but because of something, or someone, inside the lighthouse itself? Theory 1. Madness and isolation. Isolation has a way of twisting the mind. 3 men confined to a tiny island, cut off from the world for weeks, with only the roar of the Atlantic for company. Cabin fever, paranoia, fear magnified by storm winds. Investigators considered that perhaps one of the keepers had snapped. Could Marshall, Ducat, or MacArthur have lost control, driven by hallucinations, guilt, or sheer panic? The log entry, "MacArthur is crying," hints at emotional strain far beyond normal discomfort. Could fear have escalated into hysteria? Could a single moment of madness have triggered a chain reaction, leading all 3 men to flee the safety of the lighthouse? Theory 2. Fight or mutiny. Another possibility, though grim, was violence among the men themselves. Arguments on isolated lighthouses are rare but not unheard of. Tempers flare, tempers snap. And when 3 men are trapped together, any conflict can escalate rapidly. Could one man have attacked the others? Could a struggle have forced them toward the cliffs? Perhaps one man died or was forced overboard, and the others followed, either out of fear, guilt, or instinctive self-preservation. But there's a flaw in this theory. No bodies, no blood, no physical evidence. If violence occurred, it left nothing behind. Nothing. Which makes this theory troubling but incomplete. Theory 3. Cover-up or fouled records. Some investigators whispered of a deliberate cover-up. Perhaps the men discovered something dangerous on the island. Perhaps they witnessed illegal activity or something unspeakable, and authorities concealed it. The Northern Lighthouse Board was meticulous, almost obsessive about record-keeping. Yet the logbooks contained cryptic entries about severe winds that weren't reported elsewhere. Why? Were they trying to hide something? Or were they warning someone? Official reports attribute the disappearance to a wave, but internally, investigators doubted it. Perhaps the public never needed to know the truth. And yet, even a cover-up cannot explain why the men themselves vanished. The unanswered question. Human theories have a fatal flaw. The men weren't just missing. They weren't dead in the lighthouse. They weren't clinging to cliffs. They weren't found in any conceivable accident zone. They had disappeared entirely. If humans were responsible, either through violence, madness, or coercion, then how did they manage to vanish without leaving a trace? The official report never addressed this. It left investigators with a lingering, terrifying thought. Perhaps the danger wasn't human. Perhaps it was something far more unpredictable. And that's when theories start to drift into the supernatural. Because on the Flannan Isles, men don't just disappear. They are taken. By forces no one can see. Forces no one can explain.
For sailors who frequent these waters, some things are better left unsaid. When humans fail to explain a mystery, the mind searches for something else, something beyond logic. On the Flannan Isles, the impossible becomes almost believable, because sailors, fishermen, and lighthouse keepers have been telling the same stories for centuries. Some say the island itself is alive, a living, breathing force that does not tolerate intruders. Local lore refers to the Flannan Isles as the island that eats men. Not metaphorically, literally. Fishermen whispered that storms on the islands were not storms at all, but expressions of the island's anger. A gust of wind could carry voices. A wave could rise higher than reason. A fog could move men from one place to another, and no one would ever know where. Keepers had reported strange phenomena before 1900. Odd lights dancing over the cliffs at night. Faint footsteps in empty corridors. Doors opening and closing on their own. Whispers carried on the wind, speaking words no human voice could produce. Some claimed the Flannan Isles hide a ghostly ship. Sailors saw a dim silhouette drifting silently near the cliffs, an old vessel that vanished before it reached the mainland. Could it have drawn the keepers from the lighthouse? Could it have lured them toward the deadly waves with its ethereal glow? Stories like this persisted in local pubs, in hushed tones, long before newspapers reported the disappearance. And even today, fishermen avoid the area at night, believing that some spirits still guard the rocks. Other legends tell of lights in the mist, will-o'-the-wisps that lead men astray, bright glimmers atop cliffs, flickering across waves, tempting the unwary into stepping off solid ground. On the night the keepers vanished, perhaps they saw such lights. Perhaps one of them, MacArthur without his coat, followed it. Perhaps the others ran to help him, and perhaps that was the last anyone ever saw of them. Even Thomas Marshall's final log hints at something inexplicable. MacArthur is crying. Was it fear of the storm, or fear of something beyond nature? Sailors insist the wind carries voices on the Flannan Isles. Some claim to have heard their own names called from the cliffs, always when no one else is near. Combine isolation, fatigue, and the eerie whispers of the Atlantic, and the line between reality and terror begins to blur. The Flannan Isles remain a place where the sea is not the only danger, where cliffs and rocks do not account for all disappearances, where human reason fails, and the impossible begins to feel frighteningly real. Some mysteries are unsolvable. Some vanishings cannot be explained. And some islands are alive.
To imagine what happened on the Flannan Isles, we must reconstruct the last hours of the keepers' lives. A timeline pieced together from logbooks, eyewitness accounts, and the cruel silence they left behind. The men began their day as always. Thomas Marshall checked the oil lamps, ensuring the beacon would shine through the fog. James Ducat inspected supplies and took readings of the weather. Donald MacArthur went about his usual duties, tending ropes and securing the west landing. The logbooks show no immediate signs of panic. Yet somewhere beneath the routine, tension simmered, unseen, unrecorded, and building. Around midday, Marshall recorded unusual wind patterns. He noted waves higher than normal, but curiously, not recorded by surrounding ships. By late afternoon, the men may have begun noticing the west landing ropes had loosened, perhaps damaged by hidden currents or unseen forces. Some theorists suggest MacArthur ventured out to secure them, without his oilskin. Why he left unprotected is unknown, but whatever drove him, fear, duty, or curiosity, set the final sequence into motion. It is here, in the shadows of speculation, that reality slips into uncertainty. One possibility, MacArthur, standing at the cliff's edge, confronted something, storm, rogue wave, or an unseen force. He panicked. He called out. Ducat and Marshall, hearing him, ran to help. Perhaps they attempted to pull him back. Perhaps they were trying to secure something dangerous. Perhaps they were lured outside by the same mysterious force that had haunted the island for centuries. Within minutes, the lighthouse fell silent. No more entries, no more meals, no more men. Inside the lighthouse, the kitchen still had half-eaten food. A chair was overturned, suggesting a sudden rush. Oilskins were missing, except for one man. The beacon remained unlit. Outside, bent railings, displaced ropes, and a single massive stone moved from its place. The evidence paints a chilling picture, an abrupt, chaotic, and violent moment. Yet no bodies, no screams, no witnesses. Whatever happened, it happened fast, and it happened in a way that left the men completely erased from the island. Were the keepers victims of a freak wave? Of sudden madness? Of a supernatural force the locals have whispered about for centuries? We may never know. All that remains is a lighthouse frozen in time, and a question that echoes across the Atlantic. What could make three men abandon everything they knew, step into the wind, the waves, and simply vanish? The last 24 hours on the Flannan Isles remain a puzzle, a story written in fear, silence, and absence. And though the Atlantic has swallowed many secrets, this one refuses to be forgotten. More than a century has passed, yet the mystery of the Flannan Isles refuses to fade. Three men vanished from a lighthouse built to keep others safe. No footprints, no struggle, no bodies. Only an empty kitchen, overturned chairs, and logbooks filled with fear and uncertainty. Over the years, theories have tried to explain it all. A rogue wave, violent and unseen. Madness or despair brought on by isolation. A fight or even foul play. And perhaps forces beyond human understanding. Yet none of these explanations fully satisfy the questions that linger. The Flannan Isles remain as desolate and dangerous as ever. The Atlantic keeps its secrets close. The lighthouse, though still standing, is a monument to a story we may never fully understand. And now, we want to hear your thoughts. What do you think happened to Thomas Marshall, James Ducat, and Donald MacArthur? Were they victims of nature, of madness, of human error, or something far darker, something that cannot be explained by science or reason? Drop your theories in the comments below. We want to know how you interpret this chilling mystery. If this story captivated you, if the mystery of the Flannan Isles has left you questioning, haunted, or intrigued, then make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll continue exploring the world's darkest, strangest, and most haunting mysteries. Stories that don't just fascinate, they linger long after the screen goes dark. Because some mysteries deserve to be remembered.